Hello students, welcome back. And today we are going to talk about media and technology. And when we talk about media and technology, of course, we are going to look at work of the famous Canadian philosopher Marshall McLuhan. Now, Marshall McLuhan's most important, in the sense a very prominent and important work, is of course Medium is the Message. Thereafter, he has also written extensively and coined other terms such as global village and so on, which we will also refer to or which we will also look into during the course of this lecture. To begin with, the medium is the message is a phrase coined by, of course, Marshall McLuhan, as I already stated, and is kind of the first chapter of the book Understanding Media, the Extension of a Man, published in 1964. Now, in this term, that is, in this name of this book, he proposes that medium, that all of these media are actually an extension of our sensory organs. So, for example, television is an extension of our way of seeing, right? Or radio is an extension of the ear. McLuhan proposes also, and prominently in the first chapter, that is medium is the message, he proposes that in communication, medium itself, not the message, is of prominence. Now let's first talk about what does he mean by medium. Of course, in common parlance, you can say that medium is actually all of these media. So, for example, print to radio to television to internet, all of these formats are actually the medium. He's also kind of in his work writes that a medium can be something as simple as a tube light, right, or a bulb light. So, and if it's a neon light, so if we look at a bulb, just as a light, then it is a medium where there is no message. However, if there's neon lights and there's some sort of writing and so on, then there is a medium, which is the neon lights, and there's a content, which is or there's a message which it is trying to convey. But what he's inherently saying is that whether you choose a neon light or whether you choose a television or whether you choose internet to communicate your ideas, it is very important that you inherently take into consideration the characteristics and the nature of the medium via which you are communicating the ideas. Therefore, the medium has the value. That is inherently the point. Medium through which we choose to communicate hold as much, if not more. In many cases, he's referring as it's more valuable. So, if not more value than the message itself. Therefore, and interestingly, there's a typo in the name, in the sense that when he received the copy of the book, he saw that instead of message, the term message is a typo error as massage, and he kind of keeps that he refuses to change the title, and he keeps the title as the medium is the massage. And of course there are various interpretations to this, but the interpretation which I liked most is he's trying to convey that the medium in many ways massages our head, right? So it's basically has its own characteristics and its own nature, and therefore a lot of our behavior, our in the sense the audience's behavior, a lot of reception and perception is based on the choice of the medium rather than what is being conveyed, right? The central theory behind the medium is the massage, or the medium is the message, is that medium through which content is carried. Remember, I said neon lights or a book or a newspaper or Twitter, social media, whatever medium you are choosing, that medium actually plays a vital role in the way the message will be perceived by the so-called audience. McLuhan's theory has certainly not been neglected or forgotten. On the contrary, it has been widely studied in number of circles, academic circles, as well as whenever one is trying to figure out, how television messages are conveyed or radio and so on. So it's kind of it's used. This particular theory has been used in a very multidisciplinary manner. So it's not only related to print media or only related to the television media and so on and so forth. Now, yesterday I was actually thinking that as you students, how will you use the idea? How will you incorporate this idea, that the medium, or how will you kind of incorporate this in your own work? So there are two ways of incorporating this or thinking about this. One, you can talk about, say for example, news, right? So one, in a micro manner you can work upon, that is, you can research upon. So you can say one particular news, or a particular news being conveyed by Twitter and being conveyed by, say, print media in newspaper. So the same news, the content remains the same, but of course the medium itself is important here, because the medium will change the way the message will be received by the audience. Of course, you know that Twitter, in case of Twitter, we have a very small, less number of words being used, right? Whereas when somebody is reading in a print media, then there's a much more elaborate, one, he or she gets to read a lot of details. So these two are different mediums, and therefore, even though the message is same, both of these mediums are going to be, have different kind of impact in the news itself, when it comes to when you do a research in this scenario. Similarly, films as well. Films in multiplexes and a particular film in, say, OTT platform. Then does it change the equations when the medium is changing from, say, a multiplex to an OTT platform? So this is how you can, in number one, you can of course do a comparison study, and you can write your work. Another thing is to think in a much more macro manner, where you talk about how news itself, say for example, if I take the example of news, how our idea of news reading has itself changed with the change in the medium. So here maybe you will not focus on a particular news topic, but rather talk about how the news kinds of the delivery of news, or news itself, right, is the content itself, content in a much more wholesome manner, is kind of changing when it comes to the change of medium. We'll take a quick break here, and I have 3 questions to ask you. Number 1, who is Marshall McLuhan? Number 2, what does he mean by medium is the massage? And number 3, how will you use his theory in a particular research paper? Welcome back. Let me explain all of you once again with the aid of a much more simpler example as to what I mean by medium is important, medium is the message. So let's take, I call this example as the hole in the ground, right? So there's a well and there's water into it. So the well can be ideated as the medium, and the water can be ideated as the content. Now the content may remain same, that is, the water may remain same, but of course, how much people will drink the water will that well will be available to people will be determined by a lot of factors. So for example, where exactly is the well situated? What is the format of the well, in the sense what does the well looks like? All of these factors. Does the well fall into a very familiar travel route? All of these factors will actually decide whether the content will be consumed, content in the sense of water, will be consumed by people or not. Now here, water is of course important. Without water, there's nothing to be consumed. But here the well itself, and not just well, the characteristics and the nature of the well, or where the well is situated, how accessible is the well, do people pass this well more often or not? All of these characteristics related, which are pertinent to the well, becomes very, very important, almost as much important as the water itself, right? So this should kind of give you a clear idea what does McLuhan means when he says medium is the message. Now, just some time back, I was talking about news and I was talking about films. And we spoke that, of course, the study or kind of your research can be in a much more macro manner or in the larger context of how each of these medium has changed the content. And here, when I content, I mean the content in a much more wholesome manner. So let's talk about cinema. Of course, cinema is my forte. So when it comes to cinema, we can look at that how cinema in general has changed with the medium. And these mediums can be multiplexes, these mediums can be single screen theaters, and now this medium can be OTT streaming platforms, television, and so on. Each of these mediums has brought along with its own set of characteristics and therefore has impacted our experience of cinema in general. Let's say, for example, when we watch film on internet, right, how is this experience different from the experience of watching a film in a theater? In a theater, you are almost, engrossed with the film because you are kind of watching the film in darkness, and you're kind of completely consumed by the film. Whereas when you're watching a film in a website, in a kind of platform, in an internet platform, then you often there is a kind of tendency of us, or you at least you have that capability which is there in your hand, that whether you want to speed up the process or you want to pause or you want to go back, right? So the linearity, which was very, very prominent when it came to cinema, was somewhere disrupted when the medium changed from watching a film on a big screen than to compared to watching a film on a website and on the internet. So I'm just reading it out just to make it a little more clear to you. A film is a linear experience, and this is from what McLuhan says. Everyone watching the film participates in the same preset series of a beginning, middle, and end. I'm not quoting from McLuhan, but this is essentially the idea which he passes on. So there's a beginning, middle, and end in the film, and this is kind of the linearity of the film. We watch characters, stories unfold over the timeline, working towards a conclusion, right? This is the inherent nature of the film. Since the creation of the film, the idea has been integral to the planning and development phases. All of this is determined by the medium. Now, so this was the inherent nature of the film, right? Whereas when the film is now kind of being showcased on a website, the experience kind of changes dramatically. In context of a website, information is rarely passed on to a user in a linear experience. We all are aware of that. Instead, character traits, backstory, plot points might be split up in different pages or sections. It is up to the user to decide how to consume the information and reach a conclusion. Of course, Lev Manovich, another scholar, has also written extensively about new media and the characteristics of new media. And therefore, there are two sets of research which can happen when it comes to cinema and new media. And of course, keeping in Marshall McLuhan's idea as the backdrop, is that number one, how the product, that is, say, suppose cinema, film, is designed in a different manner because it is now being designed for a different medium. That is one way of looking at it. And another way of looking at it is that how now the cinema as a content has the perception of cinema, the experience of cinema has changed because the people are experiencing it in a different medium. So it is when it's made for a different medium, of course, from the production side of it, the characteristics of the medium is being taken into consideration by people who are making the films. And when the film is being received by a different medium, cinema is being now, it has become, and of course, in today's date, watching films on internet has become a part and parcel of film viewing, part and parcel of the culture of film viewing. In that case, then how the perception of cinema in general, or of a particular film, if you want to research on, has changed with the change in the medium. What is important here is the medium, and that's where McLuhan comes in. A statement by Marshall McLuhan meaning that the form of a message, print, visual, musical, etc., determine the ways in which the message will be perceived. This is what exactly we were talking about. McLuhan argued that modern electronic communication, including radio, television, film, computer, would have far reaching sociological, aesthetic, and philosophical consequence to a point that actually altering the ways in which we experience the world. And of course, there is no doubt that internet has changed not only it has changed our the way we to a large extent the way we behave and act. It has almost changed the way in which we experience the world. So yesterday itself I was thinking about how Google, rather than an OS, that is an operating system, is also kind of has become a lifestyle, right? And this is true when it comes to teaching as well. From the offline education to online education, how internet has penetrated, and therefore the content, right, the teaching itself has changed. So you see that even though I'm talking about Marshall McLuhan, in so many different areas you can use this theory in order to ideate or in order to encapsulate your research, your work. It is in this very simple term, that is, medium is the message, the expression implies that the form of communication being used, book, podcast, social media post, etc., so on and so forth, will affect the perception of the message that is being delivered in some way. The medium has changed, and so have we. In the next section, I'm going to go and talk about a little bit more on the digital technology and how it has kind of changed the way we interact with the content being films, the content being news, or the content being music, and so on. But before that, we'll take a quick break. Number one, whatever research you thought about, how are you going to use McLuhan's medium is the message in the research you ideated, and thereafter I would want you to go to the internet and look into the term global village. Let's begin now by talking about the modern digital technologies, and then we'll kind of quickly shift back to the print media and the oral cultures and so on. Studies have shown that our memory span have reduced due to digital technology. News stories have been replaced with 140-character tweets, something which I was talking about. Conversations have been replaced by emojis. When reading a book, I have myself stopped moving my hand on the word to get the dictionary definition after becoming familiar with the Kindle user interface. So what I often do is I ask my Alexa to tell me the meaning of a word which I don't recognize or which I'm not sure about when I read a book. So I'm talking about what kind of changes have been brought by technology, when I say technology, by the medium. So now let's talk about how McLuhan divides 3 eras of social human history. The first era he refers to as the tribal age. Then comes the age of print, and thereafter the age of the electronics. So that is the electronic age. The tribal age is characterized by a world where all the senses were balanced and simultaneous. Right? Clear? An oral culture structured by a dominant auditory sense of life. So previously the culture was much more oral, right? It was not other cultures. The phonetic alphabets and the print media revolutionized everything. So a new medium came and kind of changed everything. The tradition of an eye for an eye resulted in a shift towards sequential, linear thoughts, reducing the use of all the senses to a merely visual code. The man began developing his own individuality during the age of print. The print offered the masses some privacy, and society became fragmented as people's thinking ways and how they looked at the world kind of changed. McLuhan links the beginning of the connected thinking and the logic directly to the phonetic alphabets. The telegraph's invention marked the beginning of the end of the reign of the age of print, and this was the birth of the electronic age. And this is where I kind of asked all of you to look at the term global village. The introduction of the new electronic media, and of course, McLuhan has written extensively about television. So the new medium, that is the television sets, and film, of course, and radio, caused the printed word's power to decrease significantly. McLuhan observed a reversal of the 3,000 years bias towards a visual culture favoring the pre-alphabetic and more censor-balanced oral traditions. The instant communication greatly reduced our individuality but also connects people. So here he's repeatedly talking about how television or electronic media in much larger sense kind of has the capability of connecting people, right? There are two ways of looking at it. Of course, one way is you might say that people are, always when somebody is watching a television, then some people are sitting across, together, and it's not television was not at least initially looked at something which you do solo. So the act of viewing itself was a community act. However, when McLuhan is saying, he's also kind of looking at in another way, that is, now, that is with the electronic media, everyone can now share the same experience of watching the same image on different television sets at different time with the same effect. McLuhan therefore coins the phrase the global village, where the electronic media retribalizes human being. Right? So here we look at what do you mean by a global village. A global village describes the phenomenon that the entire world is becoming more interconnected as a result of the propagation of the electronic media technologies. Isn't it? Of course. There's an act of connectedness. So I can, there's something which is happening in America, I can instantly watch it. And therefore, it's not just the act of watching, but as a result, there is a sort of cultural, transfer which is happening as well from one country to another country. And therefore, there's a sort of connectedness which is happening between the people across countries. In Marshall McLuhan's idea, the phenomenon of the world cultural shrinking, this is what I was talking about, that as a result of electronic media, there's a sort of cultural shrinking of the world. Ideas from across the world are kind of instantaneously, and of course, television has this instantaneous effect to it, is kind of making the world a smaller place. So it's kind of making the world a sort of smaller, a global village, so to say. Right? And it is expanding at the same time due to pervasive technological advances, and that allows instantaneous sharing of the culture. So I hope you kind of get a broad idea. Of course, you will have to read in much greater length about global village in order to understand the concept. To end the lecture, I would like to give you a little idea and just one example of the kind of work which is done, keeping McLuhan's medium is the message in the backdrop. So this particular work is called, the name of the paper is Medium is the Message, or Is It? And I'm going to read out what is it? A quantitative study of media users' attitude towards advertising online and advertising offline. So advertising is the content here, and via a quantitative analysis as a research method, this particular paper attempts to understand the difference, how advertising actually, or consumer behavior is in general terms, is impacted when the medium changes from online to offline. Similarly, as I was stating earlier, education can also be something which can be, teaching can also be something which can be looked at, right? Because online teaching and offline teaching, so how inherently when the medium changes, how they impact or the perception kind of changes. So there can be very many interesting, and this kind of can be used in very many ways, and very many different different walks you can actually use this particular theory and ideate a research question and a hypothesis of your own. On that note, thank you.